Hey, hello, good morning. This is Scott Abel, and with me today is my special guest on the Content Advantage Talk Show, Paul Perrotta. Paul, thanks for
Hello.
joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Good. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Excellent. You are coming in loud and clear as well. Hey, just for a few housekeeping items, let me tell the audience a little bit about today's show, Paul, before we start interviewing you. So audience members, if you're new to the platform, let me tell you a few things about the BrightTalk platform. And if you are a regular user, these are just some reminders. First of all, today's show is being recorded, so you can come back later and watch an on-demand version of this program at your leisure. You can also share that link with others. It's actually the same link that you're using to watch the live show. About 30 minutes after today's show, that will switch into a recording that you can access on demand. Also, we cannot hear or see you. We don't have access to your camera or your microphone, so you don't have to worry about that. And you can ask a question of Paul and I at any time by clicking the Ask a Questions tab located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Doing so will open up a little text-based window that will allow you to send in a question to us. We won't know who you are, so if you would like us to know who you are, please append your name to your question, and also know that we cannot text you back an answer to the question. Instead, we'll queue them up, and I'll ask as many as possible with the time that we have available for today's show. And last but not least, you can access additional content in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel. Clicking that button will open a little document repository where you can find information on troubleshooting in case you have any audio or video snafus with the BrightTalk platform. And there's some handouts provided by our sponsor of today's show, Zoom and Software, and contact information for our guest today, Paul Perrotta. All right, Paul, so before we tackle today's topic, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your connection to today's show topic?
Yes. So I've been in technical documentation for a long time. I have been a tech docs manager since 1994. I have managed progressively larger teams in different companies. My last job was as a director and a senior director, eventually, in tech docs leadership at a high-tech company in Silicon Valley. And my role was chief of staff for the vice president of that organization. My purview was that I had all of the common functions of the management team with regard to staffing, budgets, managerial decisions that were going to be, what do you call it? Policies. There you go. Policies across the whole organization. So I coordinated a lot of that. So I kind of got into the weeds and did a lot of work there in ways that I hadn't before.
Well, and that's really interesting too. I loved that title that you had, the chief of staff title. And I think, how did people react to you? Did you use that out loud? Did you go, hello, I'm the chief of staff of so
No.
So did you get any reaction? It kind of sounds like
I did not. It was
job.
a role. It wasn't my title. And so my title was Director of Information Experience or Senior Director of Information Experience, but my role was that of Chief of Staff and Head of Operations. So I could use that if I wasn't getting any traction, especially with somebody outside the group. If I were meeting with another organization's representatives, I could say, oh, I'm the chief of staff for this and I'm handling it. I could go get my boss if that's what you need, but trust me, I'm representing him in this matter. And that typically would seal the deal.
I love that. that. I think a lot of us need a top secret weapon like that.
Well, it's
really a tool, not a weapon.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, because sometimes it was just a bomb. It is a good way of making, of having more than one version of yourself. So if the VP and the chief of staff are in sync, that can be a very powerful duo because that leaves the VP time to go do the things he needs to do that only he can do or she can do. And it lets somebody else handle the minutiae of the daily work of connecting things that need to be connected in ways that make sense for the organization, for the way we present ourselves, for the way we move forward as we go through whatever exercise it is that we're doing. So say you're doing the work that leads up to understanding what your compensation actions are going to be. Well, to do that, you typically have to run a calibration session where you go through and look at the performance evaluations of all the people in the organization. You categorize them, you slice and dice them. That all has to be done before the VP can look at it and say, I agree or disagree, and here's what we're going to do. I could do that with him in the room, but that's not a good use of his time. And I could do that with my peers in the organization and with other managers in the organization in ways that was a more effective use. So it's an awesome position to do or to have without actually calling somebody, oh, I'm a VP in a box. I'm the number 2 VP or something like that.
That helps explain that a little bit. Let me ask a starter, like a kickoff question. Today's show deals specifically with the role of politics in how technical documentation management decisions are made. But before we dive into the nitty gritty of it, Paul, talk to us about the word politics. What do you mean when you say politics? I don't think it's, the TV politics that we're all being drawn into at an international or national level, but it's something else. What do you mean when you say politics?
So that something else is kind of important. When you talk about politics in general, you're talking about government. And think about a political party that has an agenda. It doesn't matter if they're in power or not. They can use rhetoric, they can use the rules, they can use committee assignments, they can use all sorts of things, tradition, to try and get their way or to advance their agenda. And one of the things that most of us as Americans, at least, and I'm guessing that most people in the world would say is agreements don't get made out in the open. They get hammered out in a back room. And it's not clear if somebody is making a decision because it's the right decision to make for the general group of people that they represent, or if it's just going to help them personally or financially. And that's one of the reasons why we think so poorly, or we have a negative or pejorative connotation to the word politics. This is something a little bit different. Politics, in a more general way, it means people working in a group to get something done. And at work, that means you're working towards a common goal, and that means you're producing a new product or a new service, or you're designing a new way of getting something done, and you want to make a profit at it, right? Your goal is to make money as a team. And the things that you do to make those things happen, set priorities, get the right people on the team, try and figure out whose priorities need to adjust, whose are good, and how do we align budgets, resource, people, how do we set the timing for all that? That's the politics that I'm talking about here. And politics, even in small groups, can be very, very good, or they can be horrible. And I think we have to recognize that. It's one of the things that we don't really talk about a lot when we're talking about any kind of group dynamic. We kind of sweep it under the rug and say, well, there's the politics. But I kind of think you have to elevate that a little bit and say, it's not just we're going to sweep it under the rugs. We have to address it. And I think there are ways you can do that. But I think there are ways that you can be horribly, horribly incompetent about it. And if you don't clear it up, or if you don't address those things, it will bite you in the ass later, and things will be 100 times worse. So that's what we're talking about today.
And isn't one of the outcomes of politics, in the way that you're talking about it, really it's about trust? And if that's the case, do you agree with me about that? Is it really
I do. I think the outcome of politics is trust. Trust is the level of predictability that someone has that they will do something that they say they will do. So if I have a high degree of trust in you from having worked with you for a long time, I know you're going to do the right thing. I know you're going to represent the right kinds of things. Even if mistakes are being made, mistakes are made honestly, because everybody makes mistakes. If people didn't make mistakes, we wouldn't need companies, right? The whole point is to say, yes, the political capital you wield because I can predict what you're going to do. You're going to do the right thing at the right time. You're going to have a line of reasoning or a chain of reasoning that says this is the right thing to go do, and I can understand it. That is the trust that then in an unknown situation, I will say your politics are good. And we don't talk enough about that in terms of bad politics and good politics. It is a double-sided coin.
Well, we are going to talk about bad politics and good politics. But before we do that, I wonder if you'd answer this question for me. One of our viewers asked if you've heard the word politics used in different ways. And if you have, how did you interpret these different uses? And could you give us some examples?
Yes. So politics gets thrown about a lot, and politics gets used in a few different ways, and there are shades of meaning in it. And at least in the American vernacular, it can be quite a shady little term. So you can say, hey, their politics is straight and I'm totally with them. They're screwed on right. Let's go. And that's a vote of confidence. Okay.
Yep.
Another person can say, these politics are murky, meaning they're not certain who to trust. And what that tells you is there's already a red flag and that you haven't even entered a conversation. The politics are murky. And the reason for that is in the past, someone has been a bad actor, or you don't have enough information about what was really going on. That's often the case in a corporate setting, in a hierarchical setting. That's not so much the case in other settings, but you have to remember people only remember what they remember. They know what they know. And when they say the politics is murky, they don't know who to trust. You can also say, there are people who will say, well, I'm not political. And I think that's a nice way to put it would be to say that's naive. I think what you mean is you're not being partisan. Partisan means you're going to go for your team or your point of view, the person representing you, it doesn't matter who, regardless of whether it's logical, makes sense, or is the right thing to do. That would be a partisan. When someone says, I'm political, they're saying, when someone says about you, I think you're very political, what they mean is very partisan, meaning you are always acting in the interest of one thing or two things, and I don't know what they are. And that part is really, really difficult because the people that we consider political and badly political are the people that we want to steer around. We don't want to be around them, right?
Agreed. Are there some examples of political statements, I guess, that people make? I mean, you touched on a few of them, but I think there are some other topics here, like motivations that we've talked about in the past. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yes.
So I think you have to understand motivations in general. And motivations are in a corporate setting, and my experience is in high tech. So that means it's in a smaller organization. Typically, when you're talking about a company, you're not talking about a huge behemoth that's been around for 150 years, right? The politics at IBM are very, very different from the politics at a small startup. And they're very, very different from a mid-sized company or a larger company that maybe hasn't been around 100 years. They're always different, but there's still always things that you can count on. There are always people who are trying to get ahead, and they want more power. And power means they want more money. And to get more money, you have to get a title. That's how it works, right? There are no people who are not titled, who are making more money and have more compensation than people who have exalted titles, executive vice president of this, general manager of that. Those people want to get more power. And that's not bad, but that's what we all want, or at least a lot of us want. And with that comes more decision-making capability, and the consequences of those decisions reflect back on that person. they get more decision making, they have more discretionary budget, all that kind of thing. And executives and directors, as they're moving up or down in a hierarchy, they often measure power in different ways. One is a title. Ooh, he's a vice president. Well,
Yes.
you find out that the vice president has one person reporting to them, and they're the vice president of closing doors. I mean, it's not necessarily the case that a vice president is a vice president is a vice president. The same is true, director of this, director of that, manager of this, manager of that, team lead of this, team lead of that. You have to ask the question, what is it you're leading? What is it you're doing? What is the impact of that? How has it grown? What is the genesis of it? How did you get into it? So in a corporate setting, you're looking for a title. Typically that correlates with pay. In America, we do not talk about this. In India, we do. So it makes it very, very uncomfortable for an American, where in your team in India, everyone talks about and knows about what people are paid. That's a whole topic in and of itself. It's fascinating. It's not good or bad or wrong or anything, but you just have to know about it. Typically, when executives are measuring power, they're going to ask, how deep is the organization? How many levels of hierarchy are there? And how well do their organizations measure up? Are they producing 3 products every 10 years, or is it 3 products a quarter? That sort of thing. How are they impacting the company's health? And what does the revenue from that look like? What does the number of sales look like? And then, of course, there are people who are really worried about how many people report through them, how big their budget is. That's a source of power for many, many people. And the problem with that is that during the good times, growth can mask a lot of really poor behavior and a lot of poor decision making. During times of growth, everybody, who cares if he's wasting a little bit of money? I realize that most people think that would be a difficult, who would ever say that? Trust me, it happens. They're like, oh my God, I got bigger fish to fry. We have to go do this. And they do. But when things get worse, all of a sudden there's a lot of scrutiny on the people who might be misbehaving now.
Yes,
and so
of
the
course.
power thing, who's going to get what's going to happen. That stuff happens all the time. And that's typically at inflection points in the market. So when things are about to change, there's a lot of uncertainty. Say you're in the middle of a pandemic.
We are.
Right? I mean, how does the power dynamic change across those organizations?
Sure.
So that's motivation. That's, why do people do the things they're going to do? And I want to tell a little story about that, because I got caught in one.
Yes, please.
In one of my first roles, or I'm sorry, in one of my first months of being at a company as the chief of staff. So the way companies communicate things, everybody has a different way, a different cadence, a different way of communicating. Our company held a quarterly all hands meeting. And prior to that, there was an all VP meeting. So only VPs could attend. And then there was an all directors and up meeting. So directors and VPs would attend. And the reason for that would be to preview what was going to happen at the all hands meeting, so that people could be prepped for questions if their team members came to them. It wouldn't be news to the directors and VPs when they saw it. So they would have been exposed to the information. But when it's just VPs, and I never attended those, when it's directors and VPs, it's a little bit more frank, and the people are not quite as, they don't put nice language around things. It can be fairly direct. I was at a directors meeting. We had people dialing in, and the top Asia Pac sales director complained to when the president opened up the floor for questions. He said, "What are we going to do about the shitty documentation we have at our company?"
Oh,
So,
and how'd that go?
and you start to pay attention, and what was happening was he was grandstanding. He was trying to shift blame on another organization, the people who produced the documentations, to take the spotlight off his own organization's poor performance. And that's a common tactic that you do. What he could have done was to contact the head of documentation or the senior VP to whom documentation reported and said, hey, who does the documentation? I have some issues. Instead, what he did was he was at a very open meeting at a very high level. He talked about how shitty, and that was his word, the documentation was, how it never got updated. It was always wrong. And his people were really struggling. So of course, we were in the room. Everybody looks at me and at my boss and at the people in the room who are responsible for documentation. My boss says, hey, let's have a conversation. It turned out that this guy who had complained, his own organization had created a website that had documentation that they had kind of pulled together because they needed sales notes and sales engineering notes and a few other things. They weren't looking at the company documentation at all. In fact, they didn't know where the website was. So when we got the readout, the president of the company called my boss and said, hey, something came up a week ago. You've had a week. Let's chat. And my boss very nicely did not throw him under the bus, but said, hey, he wasn't looking at the company documentation site. We do have lots of documentation for the products he was representing. He never reached out to me ahead of time. He didn't know how it worked, and he didn't understand that we're here to help him. And we have tons of information that he didn't look at or know about because he was looking at something that was over 5 years old. What that does, so that's a power play. The other guy had basically tried to hold us out in front of the company and say, hey, there's a lot of dirty laundry here. We better go look at them. And what he really did was shoot himself in the foot, because what showed he didn't know how our website worked. He didn't know the common courtesy of reaching out to a peer organization and saying, hey, I have all these issues and I'm going to bring it up at the all hands director meeting. He didn't do any of those common courtesies, and it meant his own political capital went down because he wasn't working as a good corporate citizen. And that's how it's normally done. So the guy ended up having to leave for other reasons, for performance reasons. But you couldn't find anyone who would say anything nice about him after that, because he kind of just blurted everything out. And I'm sure he was frustrated and all that, but he ended up hurting himself by not being a team player and by showing that he was being too political.
Right. And partisan.
What's that?
And partisan.
And partisan. And he got caught.
Yeah, and he got caught in it. So what's bad and good politics then? It seems like you could use this as a tool, right? It doesn't have to be a weapon. It doesn't have to be wielded willy-nilly, so to speak. Yeah. You can do some good things with it. So what's bad politics look like? How do you know it when you see it?
I say bad politics means there's a few things in there. Bad politics shows up when there's not a lot of trust. And the trust isn't there because people don't understand what's happening. And that can happen for a lot of reasons. One of the things that's really interesting is there are actions that leadership teams take all the time that have privileged information in them that they have to act. So say, for example, leadership team lets someone go. They terminate someone's employment in the organization for a very good reason.
Yeah.
And they can't talk about it. It's private stuff. But everybody else says, wow, that was a really good person. They must be trying to bring in their friends, and they're going to hire someone we don't like, so they're bad people. That is always a problem when you don't understand what is being done or why things are being done. So lack of information. That's bad politics because someone didn't frame it. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Another one is bad politics happens when you don't follow through on the things you promise. So if you make you make a promise in a meeting, somebody asks a question and says, wow, this tool is really, really terrible. And I can't do my job because of X. It has a bug and no one seems to be able to fix it. And the leadership team promises, hey, all right, we'll follow up and let's work on this. And no one ever does anything. Trust levels go down and everyone says, oh, they were covering their asses in the meeting and they have no intention of helping us. That kind of thing happens all the time. When in fact, they could actually be doing that. They could be terrible people, or they could just forget, because sometimes they do. Another is just habitually missing commitments and deadlines inside your own org or out. That is a very, very damaging way of spreading bad politics, because people who don't care about your time must not care about other stuff as well. And by extension, people will ascribe bad political leanings to them. So that's one whole set. Another set is of bad politics just happens because people don't understand the function. And that's really common for people, especially for older companies. I have worked in companies where I've heard other organization leaders say things like, all they are glorified typists. Why are there so many people in this organization? Now, aside from the fact that they don't understand the function, what they're really doing is saying, I need money and nobody will give me money, so I should take somebody else's.
Yeah, exactly.
What's that?
I said that seems like something inherent that humans would do, and sometimes maybe not even intentionally. I think it's something that is like a reaction to the fear that they have that things aren't going well in their turf, so let's shift the blame someplace else. But that begs the question, if that's what bad politics looks like, can you give us a clue what good politics would look like?
Yeah. So good politics occurs when you do the right thing for the company, and you go out of your way to demonstrate that. So it's what you do, it's behavior. Good politics, trust, the result of good politics is higher trust. When you start helping other people to do something within your team, outside your organization, people start to say, oh, these are really good things that they're doing. And so say, for example, you have a product management team, and they don't understand some of their own information flows. That's really, really common. People think, oh, I need to do this document and it's going to be the be all and end all. So they come up with a document that says, here's a list of all the features of a new product and here's how it fits in the product family, blah, blah, blah. And they stick it on a website and nothing ever happens to it. Does it ever get updated? Does it have a life cycle? Does it get reviewed by anyone? It turns out that's kind of important. If you help people understand what they're doing and show them, hey, it's not enough to just produce a document. That's a hard thing to do. And there's a lot of skill in doing that properly for the right audience at the right time. But also you need to understand where it sits in the flow. Will it still be valid 2 years from now? Will there be something else that comes along? How does this fit in the overall thing? You can, in the overall product family constellation, you can help people understand that. And you can help them understand that you are part of the solution to making things better in the organization, in the entire company. And you have skills, you have people, you have a willingness to help other people. And good political behavior begets higher trust, and it helps people understand what you're trying to do. It's really quite amazing how much you can get out of that just by doing good deeds in your local ecosystem.
We are at the halfway point of the show right now, so I'd like to encourage audience members who haven't yet to submit a question for Paul and I of consideration using the Ask a Question tab located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Clicking the button will open up a little text-based window and let you type in a question. We won't be able to answer you back, but we will queue them up, and we've got some right now that we'll answer here in just a few minutes. But before we do, Paul, I wanted to see if you could tackle this last question I have for you, which is, how do we think about reducing the amount of negative political emotion that's associated with us or a team, after we recognize that that's a problem?
I think that's a really good question. The way to combat that is to start behaving in a way that you want to see other people behave. And that means you probably need to set and follow your own personal and organizational principles.
Yeah.
And that's really important, because what it says is, here's where I'm aiming, and you can judge me against that. You also need to articulate a vision for your organization. You need to tell people where you want to go. What does what we're doing look like 3 years from now? Are we all still just going to be doing PDFs? Is that all we're going to do? Are we going to do any chatbots? Are we going to have any video? Are we going to do multi-channel publishing? Are we going to do any kind of localization? What does that look like, and why? That organizational vision, the thing that says where you want to go, has to be linked to the company's vision and goals. If you're doing something and the company's doing something completely different, trust me, you're not going to get any budget to go do what you want to do. You have to be able to link them in ways other people can understand, because what that does is it says, oh, they're doing the right thing at the right time for the right people. And I like that because I'm probably a shareholder. I'm probably would like to keep my job, and I want this company to keep going. They're a part of that. And then finally, so the first two, set and follow your personal principles, articulate a vision for your organization, link that vision to the company goals and vision, and then you have to respect your own principles and incorporate them into your daily routine. So if your principle is, I'm not going to lie to you, and then someone comes up and says, what do you think about my presentation I did today? You don't have to tell them it was a horrible, horrible, shitty presentation. You could say, I'm really glad you gave that presentation. You really helped me. I'd love to give you some pointers on how you could improve it. That is, your principle is you're not going to lie, but you're not going to dash someone's hopes to pieces. You wait for peers to do that. You as a leader need to be able to say, I am here to help you. I am the catalyst for making stuff happen. And that's how I think of leadership, as setting goals and then helping people to get there.
Thank you for that. Before we tackle the rest of the interview, this is probably a good time for me to tell the audience a little bit about today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is ZoomIn Software. And in case you're unaware, ZoomIn is a platform that allows you to ingest product content from pretty much any source, no matter how it was created or published, structured, unstructured content, or otherwise. And it delivers it to multiple output channels, including the web, a documentation portal, maybe your customer support center and your online community, or maybe right inside of the product, your web-based products themselves. So if you're interested in that, I recommend that you check them out on the web. ZoomIn can help you improve the customer experience by making it super easy for customers to find the answers that they're looking for, no matter where those answers are coming from. And if you check the attachments section of today's webinar viewing panel, you'll find that there are 5 or 6 pieces of content in there that you don't want to miss. One is the state of self-service content experiences. It's a white paper that explains what's going on in self-service world. There's also a case study from one of their customers in Perrotta on how they enhanced customer care using the ZoomIn documentation portal and bringing all their content together. There's also a link where you can request a demonstration or some additional information from ZoomIn, and I encourage you to do so. Of course, you can also just do it the old-fashioned way and dial up in your web browser, zoominsoftware.com, and check out what they've got on the website. That will also suffice. All right, so let's go back to the show. And Paul, I've got a question for you. How do you use politics positively? Can you provide us with some recommendations on how we can develop positive politics that actually work for us?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think maybe we as a function in a corporate setting have not been too good about, or in the past, long in the past, was that when people talk to us, we talk to them in our language about our things and expect them to understand. So when someone says, well, isn't it really easy? You just press a button and it pops out the printer. And then you go into a long discussion about a CCMS and how you assembled everything, and you're using DITA, and you've got this wonderful way that everything is orchestrated to come together and produce something on the printer. And everybody's eyes glaze over. It's the same thing when you go in and talk about a problem, or you talk about pages per day that you've written or something like that. It's the way that we used to just show people that we knew what we were doing and was completely uninteresting to anybody else outside the org. I think that that's probably not the best way to approach it. And I know that from horrible experiences where now I know better, but I think I made every mistake that's possible to make. And these days, I think you have to understand, one, your own organization, how it compares to other organizations inside and outside the company. And that includes metrics. You have to understand your own metrics. Part of being in a large organization or any organization is you have a budget, and the budget gets renegotiated typically yearly, but often on a half yearly or quarterly basis, which means you have to walk in and basically prove yourself all the time. And you better have ammunition for that. So what does that look like? What is the ratio of developers to documentation pros at your firm? And what is it at other companies or in the industry? So if you are working where you have 50 developers for every writer, and the industry standard is 18 or 12, depends who you talk to. By the way, you have to make certain you don't quote somebody that's way off. But you could make an argument that you should have 3 times as many people. But is anyone going to say, all right, you've convinced me. Why don't you go and hire 30 people? No one does that. What they do is they say, why don't you hire 10 people this year? We'll see how it's going, and let's see what else we can do, right? There are, you have to understand that kind of thing for your budget. You have to understand documentation defect rates. So when engineers talk about defects, about their problem reporting, and they have things like MTTR and MTTB and all the kind of things that everybody measures and looks at. If you're not measuring those exact same things in the same language and can show them that you're doing the right thing, people consider you a black box and they don't understand what's going on, and they should. That it's very important that they do that, because it means that you're on their side. You're using their language. You are doing the same things that they do to make certain that quality is okay. Another is customer satisfaction. You have to understand what your customer satisfaction scores are. There's typically a corporate score, but I wouldn't rely on that. I would also be doing my own polling, my own solicitation of what customers think of your documentation. And customers are in-house people. They are paying customers. They are potential customers. You have to understand all that. And then you have to understand in the giant morass of what you do to produce whatever documentation you produce, what do other firms do in your space? If you're a cybersecurity firm and you produce PDFs because you love PDFs, and all of your competitors are doing educational videos and their social media work, and there are chatbots to help people understand basic terminology and how to configure things, and there's in-product help. If they're doing that and you're not, why not? What does that look like? You could go get budget to go do those things if it makes sense for your company, but you have to be able to say those things. That what you're demonstrating is that you understand your organization and where you fit within the company, outside the company. That's number one. You just have to understand all that. Number two is you have to do what you say you'll do. Customer support is going to go up by 0.2 points from 4.5 to 4.7 in the coming year. And I'm going to go make that happen. And you have to make that happen. And, you know, whether you don't or not, you have to demonstrate that you're doing those things. You've aligned your organization to do that. You have regular readouts on what the activities are that you're doing. And your management team is part of that. You should be doing that. And then the last is do the right thing. Don't go against your own principles. If you understand your own organization and can demonstrate that to the rest of the people in the company, and you do what you say you'll do and you do the right thing, that's using politics in a way that people can trust. That people can predict, and the trust levels go up, and suddenly you are a pro at what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. And I think there's some sound advice in there as well. We do have some questions from the audience I'd like you to tackle in the time that we have remaining.
Okay.
Tina would like to know, does politics only occur at the top level of the organization?
No. So it happens at all levels, individual contributors all the way up to top levels. I know we have all been on a project where your project leader, who is not a manager, stands up and says, here's who made this possible. And they give every name but yours. And you go up to them later and you go, wait a minute, I did lots of work on that. I thought my name would be mentioned too. And they're like, yeah, but you know, you're really difficult to work with. And we didn't want to highlight that. Wow. Somebody made a political decision about you, and it kind of indicates the level of trust around your work and around working with you. That's something that you probably should think about. So sharing credit for successes or getting blamed for problems. Often what will happen is, hey, something didn't go out on time. We committed to having these release notes out on this date and it didn't go. What happened? A political answer would be, well, Paul didn't do his part until really, really late. We'd all gone to bed. The less political thing to say would be, you know what, we got bogged down and we couldn't get it quite done at the goal line. And here's what we're doing the next time. Those politics exist all the time. And as you go higher in the organization, they get attached to money and other things that that other people might care about. But honestly, it's really, really important that you know that there's politics at all of those levels. And I've seen it. I worked in an organization once where all the directors and senior directors on the team hated each other. And there were people who could not be in the same room because their politics were so bad.
Wow, it's kind of like the shape of the country and the world at this moment. In fact, seems very similar to the corporate hierarchy.
It is children behaving poorly.
It is children behaving badly. How about
honestly?
How about this from Josephine? She asks to shift topics. What do you mean by knowing metrics about your own organization?
So the metrics. You have to, there are some really good books out there about this. Mark Lewis has a book about metrics. You can talk to other organizations. Most content development organizations have a list of things that they're looking at all the time. There's performance to schedule. There's how many people does it take to produce one piece of documentation. There's how many channels does something go through. There's all sorts of checks that you can do. Documentation people look at things internally that is important to them, but that metric does not matter one bit to somebody in customer support. And if someone comes to you and says, I have all these, I want to know about your metrics, and you start talking to them about, you know, the number of words written per page that you've done, or the number of words per panel that you've done, their eyes will glaze over and they're going to walk out saying, this guy doesn't know what they're talking about. What you want to do is relate it to other metrics that other people have. And to do that, you have to know what they are, for one. So go talk to the customer support people and find out what they measure. Go talk to the test organization and find out, what are the top 5 things that your executives looked at on a regular basis? If it's mean time to repair, you better know what the mean time to repair metric looks like for your organization. And this is an area where many people trip. If you can't talk about this in ways that make sense outside your organization, people will believe you don't know what you're doing. That's
Wow.
a problem, because they will bring in people who do, that they believe do, even though you're really good at your job. So you have to go and look at stuff. So one of the things that engineering organizations measure, typically if you have problem reports coming in, it doesn't matter what you call them. They all have different names at different companies, but you have a problem report that comes in, and it typically gets categorized. Typically, or often, it's on a scale of 1 to 5, where a priority 1 problem means a product is down, a customer's down, can't work, or it's a severe outage for them, and you have to do something really fast. You call that a P1, priority 1 bug. If engineering has a commitment to fix a P1 bug in 18 hours, and it takes your organization 3 months to fix one because you don't care about P1 bugs, trust me, someone is going to come after you at some point. And that becomes the politics. People will just say that, it doesn't matter about the P1 thing, but they'll say, oh, I don't like you, and you don't know how to manage this. Part of keeping your nose clean, part of understanding how other people look at you and see through their eyes what your organization is doing and how you do it and how you treat the people around you, is in understanding and previewing what it is they're going to look for and understanding how you measure up. It's a lot of effort, but it's not so big that you can't do it. And people are willing to talk about this stuff. Here's what we measure. It's probably not interesting for you. The product management group probably measures stuff that you don't care about, but they might. I'm a firm believer, for example, that documentation is a pre-sales tool and is part of a sales cycle and a customer journey. And if you could talk to a product management team and get information about that, do you run a survey that says, we made decisions based on the completeness of your documentation?
Right.
You just assigned a value to the documentation. We were responsible for 10% of the revenue growth this quarter. Please give me money. I would like 1% of that back. You can make those arguments and you'll get it.
We have somebody who's asking, is it better to underestimate success and then overperform? Should I underpromise with my metrics and then overdeliver?
No.
Okay. Tell us why.
Don't lie. What you should do
is that why? Because it's a lie? Is that the thing?
You're taking a guess and you don't know. What you should say is, I don't know about this. I think I can do this. And once we have 3 months of traction with this, I can make better predictions. Yeah. I would not. So back up a little. I would overperform a little bit, but I wouldn't do it consistently, because people will then start to not trust what you're telling them. So you have to. You can't do that too much. If you say it's gonna take you 3 months to do something, don't tell them 2 months.
Right. Well, I guess in my experience, there was an opportunity for myself, and I believe I was working with Ann Rockley at the time. We were in a consulting gig with a big company, and we had noticed, after doing a content analysis and an inventory of what content they had available, and really deep diving into what content was inside of each one of these documents, we estimated that there was like 60 to 70% maybe repurposable content, because a lot of this stuff is just regurgitated from document to document, because if it was a life sciences company and they were trying to submit content for regulatory approval before they could sell to customers, they need to be able to get their products approved. And that 60% potential reuse seemed too grandiose. Like nobody would believe that number was so big. So what we said was something like, we're aiming for 25%, but we see the possibility of escalating that number higher, especially as we get better over time. So our argument was, if you put somebody in front of a new computer system today with a brand new process, they will perform their task at XYZ number of minutes and seconds. But if you allow them to do that task with the new software and the new process and the new procedures for 3 months and come back and retest them again, they may be able to do that in 15 seconds. That took them 3 minutes to do the first day they did it, because they've got gotten better over time. And so reuse can get better over time too, as they learn more about the system. So, but I like your advice about not fibbing. I can see where that would lead to bad things.
So,
Maxwell, go
in
ahead.
your case, though, I
Yeah.
think that's a really good example. If you really believed it was 60%, but you knew that the customer might not believe that,
We'd be
then
having more meetings. That's what would happen. We were
yeah,
like, we're gonna call a meeting and go, how did you come up with 60%? We're like, but what if we just say 25%, and then we get to 30 on our first round, and then we go, wait a minute, we undercounted. It looks like we can get to 40%. So we were kind of creeping toward
yeah,
our goal instead of, we didn't want to project it and then be wrong and then have a fail.
correct. So I call that continued success. So you have a series of successful steps, and you're like, wow, we underestimated what this is going to be. We think we can do better. I think that's an awesome way to approach stuff.
Excellent. Here's a question for you that we do not know the person who asked this question, but it is, how do you make the case for a documentation hub to make it easy for your customer to find stuff and standardize processes in an organization that makes it easy to operate in silos?
So I think this is a really big problem for a lot of companies. And
I agree with that.
I think what we do today is, say you're a customer, you go to the website of the company you're interested in, and you look at the documentation and you want to know, are there any classes that are available in this? Are there any white papers? Is there any marketing material? And we somehow force our customers to understand our corporate org chart to know where to go. So you go to the customer service website to look for classes. You go to the marketing website to look for white papers. You go to the sales part of the website so that you can find comparisons of products and things like that. I think that's a poor way of doing something. I think that the website itself should be unified. And if you have a product or a service that you have information about, all of it should be there on a single website or a single web page. And the organizations who supply that have the responsibility to supply correct information on time. They may not have the disciplinary ability to do that in ways that documentation people would, because we understand how documentation works. That doesn't take them off the hook. And that means you also have to develop processes that will keep that going and keep it fresh and make certain it's still correct and all that kind of stuff. And you have to work that out. So you have to have a series of interlock meetings where we're going to talk about this web design, what's going to be on it, what we can put on it, when is it due? You don't give it to me the minute before we throw the switch and say, yes, this page is live. So I need to know what that's going to look like. And I want to make certain that your management chain has blessed this, because we don't need to get to the end and then find out someone was uninformed. You have to do all that work, and it's hard work. That's really hard to do. And it will take you a long time to do, but you don't have to do it all at once. Who's your sister organization? Work with them first. You have to be able to have some kind of control over the web page where you're going to be. If you have that, you've got half the work done already.
Don't you also have to kind of dabble in the silo busting or merging, if you're not going to break them up, yourself before you can demonstrate the value of doing it across the entire organization?
You do, to a certain extent, and it really depends on how the organization is set up, how your company is set up. If your company is a centralized company, meaning all documentation is in one place, all marketing is in another, all engineering is in another, that's very different from having, say, a business unit that has its own marketing documentation, legal representation, HR, and sales engineers all in one org, and they have a website. And then you do that for another organization that produces a different product. You would approach that differently in those cases, and that matters. Because what if the company then flips, going from decentralized to centralized? What are you going to do? Presumably, your design on the website would allow that to happen without having your customers having to know it.
Speaking of flipping, Max would like to know, what's your advice when a new C-suite comes on board all at once and a few busybodies try to promote an ill-advised viewpoint? This happened to me. My VP was part of a wrecking crew who came on board to help package up the company for sale. Is there an effective way to rise above politics and inform new executives of what the real issues are? I guess without being tossed out of the office.
So one of the things that you could do is just find out what their politics are. Why are they here? You can ask them, what are the things that are important to you? What do you see so far? How could I help you? Don't make it about, here's what I'm going to go do. It is informational from your perspective to ask them, what is it you're looking for? And who are you working with? And then go chase it down for all those people and find out what it is that's really important to them. Often when you're doing some kind of M&A work, the information is a little bit secret. Well, it's a lot secret because you don't give that out ahead of time. But often you can divine what's going on and you can say, oh, we're being prepped for sale. And they're going to probably want to have the trimmest expense line with the largest revenue line. That's typically what you sell, right? You also have to know, is this team, this leadership team, permanent, or are they just going to be there for 2 years and then they take off? You can ask all sorts of questions, and I would start there. I wouldn't abandon my own principles, but you have to understand that you might not be in a winnable situation.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And the last question, we've got about a minute for you to answer, is from Donna, who's curious to know, have you ever encountered politics or a political situation that actually helped your organization?
Yeah, it actually was pretty cool. I have to think about how we did that. We were working with marketing folks to develop a social media presence, and the marketing folks were pretty savvy, but they didn't have process information about what was going on and how to say, okay, I don't know how often to do this. I don't know how often I'm going to put blasts out on Facebook, Twitter, in some of the other social media places. We didn't have Instagram then. But there was a lot to do, and they knew what they wanted to do, but they didn't have the process material behind them. So we ponied up and we partnered with them to show them how that might work. And we gave them a couple of people, just part-time, 10% of 2 people's time on a weekly basis, to say, why don't we just test run this and see what kind of problems we have? And if you're okay with that, we'll go that way. Later on, we were talking to a product management group who was initially hostile to our organization. And the marketing folks defended us when we weren't in the room and said, those people are really, really collaborative, and they go out of their way to help people when they don't have to. And it ended up that we started developing a good relationship with the product management team, and it ended up helping us because we were doing the right thing for the right people.
Excellent. Well, we're going to have to stop right there, and I'll have to say thank you to Paul for being our guest today. So thank you very much for joining us today and being on the show. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope that our audience members will join us. We have a show coming up in 2 weeks, The Content Advantage, with Akash Dubey. He's the Director of Technical Publications and Localization for iManage, a content management and collaboration platform. He's going to come and talk about whether technical communication shops should be preparing for changes in the way engineers work as more engineering teams scale to they're agile across to other teams and try to spread it across the enterprise. And Akash will discuss whether we need to stop and take notice of this new methodology and maybe even work more closely with our partners and neighbors in engineering. We also have some other upcoming shows you don't want to miss. In fact, in just about an hour from now, we'll be putting people first. And Catherine Walker and Christine Schwepker will be talking about how Express Scripts brings all of their content teams together. These 2 leaders will talk about how they blended their teams and talk about some of the issues that they've encountered. And this is part of our series of webinars with Perrotta. Also, Rahel and Bailey will be talking to you about how to become a successful content strategist on October 27th on the Let's Talk Content Strategy Show with Ranjini Srinivasan. Don't want to miss that. Those two have some great topics to talk about. And Rahel's got advice that will definitely be helpful if you are a budding or aspiring content strategist. We also have a superstar, Robert Rose, content marketing and strategic content expert, talking about content operating models on October the 28th, brought to you by Ingenuix. And on the Let's Talk Personalization show with Kevin Nichols on November the 2nd, we'll be talking about personalization and digital transformation with Vijay Hanumolu on how his organization is personalizing content as part of their digital transformation. And last but not least, we'll have Adventures in XLIF. This will be a translation-specific webinar about how to scale translations with Enzo. I'm going to mispronounce his name now. Kolezi. I apologize for that. On scaling translation in enterprise technical product content teams. That show will be brought to you by Poligo. You've been watching today Politics in Technical Communication. I'd like to ask you to do me a favor, and before you sign off, we'd appreciate it if you take a moment and let us know what you thought about today's show. Use the Rate This tab located in your webinar viewing panel to give us a 1 through 5 star rating. Feel free to use the text box provided to leave a comment or suggest a topic for a future episode of The Content Advantage. You've been watching The Content Advantage. Today's show has been recorded. Shortly after you sign off, a link that we'll send you a link that you can use to view today's recorded program and share that link so that they can others can watch it as well. On behalf of myself and Zoom In Software, our sponsor, I'd like to thank you for making time to watch our show today. We hope you'll join us for upcoming episodes. Until then, be safe, be well, and keep doing great work. We'll see you again at another Content Wrangler event. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.